Hello, good evening and welcome to Vantage Point. I'm Nadim Majid. These are interesting times for Sri Lanka. Where is the country headed politically, economically and also socially? To discuss all this and more, we have with us this evening Dr. Dayan Jayatilaka to share his perspective on where's the country heading. I'd like to talk about the status quo a bit. That seems to be sort of an issue in the country. The 100-day government, people are saying its time is up. The government is saying its time is up. Where does the status quo really stand at the moment? Where is the center of power?
Well, I think there are contending centers of power, and there are important decisions being taken which probably do not have the endorsement of both centers. I'll give you an example. I read in the political column of the Sunday Times on the 31st of May, Sunday Times, Colombo, that there are teams from the U.S. Homeland Security and the U.S. Department of Justice in Colombo helping investigate the doings of the Rajapaksa regime, the former Rajapaksa regime. Now, I had a couple of problems with that. One is, as you well know, Homeland Security means exactly that. It's an intelligence department set up after 9/11 for the explicit purpose.
For the explicit purpose of protecting the U.S. homeland.
The U.S.
The
homeland.
Continental United States and U.S. territories.
Absolutely. So what are agents from U.S. Homeland Security doing investigating the Rajapaksas or being here in Sri Lanka anyway?
Offering expertise?
Yes, but nothing. Their expertise is on the protection of the United States itself. It says so in their mandate. What threat did the Rajapaksas pose to the United States of America? I mean, apart from sort of being too close to China. Now, more importantly,
maybe they're sharing expertise with the Sri Lankan government on national security, because we've seen the president talk about a new national security plan.
Well, whatever expertise they're sharing, I wonder what they're doing here, because this is not part of the U.S. homeland as yet. It's not Hawaii. So one wonders. More importantly, and speaking to your point about centers of power, does President Sirisena know? Does the cabinet know? Was it ratified by the cabinet? Does the parliament know? Has the parliament ratified it? These are foreign agents, however well-intentioned they may be, belonging to U.S. Homeland Security and the Department of Justice, brought here at the invitation of Mangala Samaraweera, says the newspaper report, and sent here as a response to that invitation, sent here by Secretary of State of the United States, John Kerry. Now, does the general public know? Does the parliament know, as I said? So we are in a very strange, blocked transition, Nadim. In the name of parliamentary sovereignty, we had the 19th Amendment, but the parliament doesn't seem to know about important things like this. Then there's the very recent debate or discussion about the national flag. I mean, here we go again. A member of the new government, Mr. Joseph Michael Pereira, had expressed the view or disclosed that a new flag was in the pipeline for use at on official occasions, and that wasn't the existing national flag. Now, has that been debated in Parliament?
Was it on official occasions, or were they designing? I remember a press release some time back about the Home Affairs Ministry talking about a decorative flag for non-state.
Well, the report says that he said on the radio that it would be for state events, and if it's the Ministry of Home Affairs, what do they have to do with non-state events? That's to do with civil society. So, has any of this been discussed in Parliament? Has it come up in Cabinet? Who decides these things? There is a very strange, anomalous situation, Nadim, of complete. You heard of the fog of war. This is the fog of peace. It's complete confusion. There's no transparency. In the name of transparency, there was a change in regime, but There's no transparency about what's going on. And at the level of the economy, may I say the all-important level of the economy, very little does seem to be going on. There is a kind of a stasis, there's stagnation, rollback in some sectors. The figures show that the import-export figures are down. So this reminds me of what the great Antonio Gramsci once famously said. He described a certain transitional period, and he said, the old is dying and the new cannot yet be born. And it is in this interregnum that the most morbid symptoms appear. So we are now seeing the most morbid symptoms, surreal symptoms.
So we can be hopeful that a new is being born.
Well, not unless it's allowed to be born democratically through an election. So you have a minority government that is, well, by definition, doesn't command, unfortunately, the majority of the House of the Parliament. It's not a government that has been elected. It's past its 100 days.
It is a minority government that did manage to secure 200 plus votes for the 19th Amendment.
That is because the 19th Amendment was not the one that the minority government drafted and brought in. That was cut down to size by the Supreme Court after Uday government.
But the minority government also had almost unanimous support for its interim budget.
Yes,
so doesn't that mean that it has some sort of support of the majority on important matters?
It has support. It's almost tautologous. It has the support of the majority on matters on which there is a consensus. In the case of the 19th Amendment, that consensus was very hard to come by. The 19th Amendment itself was truncated, watered down, modified, and finally it is President Sirisena who was able to get the SLFP and the UNP together. That seems to be the last such consensual moment, because right now the 20th Amendment is blocked. It's not moving forward. I would suspect that that's because the 100 days are over. I mean, you had an unelected government which just after the 100 days managed to push a version of the 19th Amendment through. But now it's way past its shelf life. It's 140 odd days, and therefore it doesn't have the legitimacy for the generation of any kind of consensus anymore. And that's what has happened. One choice is, of course, for the Prime Minister to step down and say, look, my 100 days are over, this government has no right to exist, I am stepping down, and try to force an election. Another option is...
Why would he step down? That wouldn't
But he's calling for an election. Why is he calling for an election? Because he...
It wouldn't necessarily force an election, given that Parliament's shelf life only expires in April.
Well, there are two ways to go from there. Now, why is Prime Minister Wickremesinghe calling for an election? Why is the UNP calling for an election? Because it feels that...
it has momentum on its side.
Well, that's the real reason, but the stated reason is that the 100-day period is over. Now, if the 100-day period is over and therefore you want elections, and you can't say, look, we'd like to have elections now because we think we might be able to do better or win, then you've got to walk the talk and step down. Now, that's what Mr. S.J.V. Chelvanayagam did when Mrs. Bandanayake and Felix Das Bandanayake were refusing to have elections. He resigned his seat in Parliament.
Forcing a by-election.
Forcing a by-election, Chavakacheri, if I remember. Now, that's a man of principle. You may disagree with his principles.
We don't really have a system of by-elections at the present, though.
Yes, but it's the same principle. If you believe, if you want to force an election, and you believe that there is no legitimacy in remaining, in the government remaining, and you're the Prime Minister, then you step down. But you allow the President to form a government of his own choice or to go for elections.
But from a political point of view, I'm just assuming regarding the Prime Minister's intentions. I'm sure the Prime Minister wants to come back to power after an election. So isn't his decision to stay on and not allow another government to be formed, as what some of the UPFA members are talking about, of bringing a no confidence motion in and bringing in their own prime minister? Doesn't it make sense for him politically to stay on and then until there is an election?
Well, it may seem so, because then he will go for an election as the incumbent prime minister, albeit unelected prime minister. But that's another problem. If he stays on too long, and I mean if he stays on a couple of weeks longer, they're going to get him with a no confidence motion. Now, of course, they can talk to the speaker and they can filibuster and they can postpone it, but eventually those with the overwhelming numerical preponderance are going to come and get the PM, because he's not an elected PM and he obviously doesn't have the majority of the House. So why do you want to be chased out as a result of a no confidence motion? You may as well leave and put moral pressure on the president, either to have an election or to appoint an SLFP PM and let them run the show. They'll probably dig a deep hole for themselves. But he's not doing that. The Prime Minister is not doing that. He's staying on. He says, curiously enough, that only the people can push him out, because he has a mandate. Now, he's piggybacking on President Sirisena's mandate. That was a presidential
But technically it was a mandate given to the president. The president did say on the campaign stage that one of his first act as president would be to appoint Ranil Wickremesinghe as prime minister.
Yes, nothing, but it was a presidential election. Now, if you run for office,
but,
among your many promises...
What I'm saying is the people were aware that they were giving the president a mandate, and along with this mandate was a government headed by Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe.
They were aware. That's not necessarily the reason they voted for President Sirisena, because if that were the main reason, then they would have voted for Ranil Wickremesinghe as president, but Ranil knew that they weren't going to vote for him as president, so for the second time around,
I'm sure it was a reason for a lot of the UNP voters, though.
Well, what, 30%? They couldn't have won.
30% plus 20%.
The UNP is in government today because of Maithripala Sirisena. If it had been Ranil Wickremesinghe, they would have lost. And that's how they blindsided Mahinda Rajapaksa, because he was getting ready to fight Ranil Wickremesinghe, which is why he kept him as leader of the UNP for so long, including, repairing that road, which he's talking about just now. I was watching that and I was thinking, hey, but why did you repair the road? Just because Ranil wanted you to repair the road, simply so he could stay in office. I think that's where that photograph down this corridor is from, where Ranil accused your station of backing his reformist opponents in the party. So Ranil was going to run, but then the opposition knew that he would have lost. Therefore, they supported a common candidate, as they did in 2010. So, if anybody owes anybody anything, the UNP owes Maithripala Sirisena far more than Maithripala Sirisena owes the UNP. And now, I would say logically that debt has been paid. They've been given 140 odd days in office, which they wouldn't have otherwise got. But if the UNP stays longer, two things are going to happen, at least two, maybe three. One, they're not going to be able to get anything moving. Two, the no confidence motion is going to come and ram right into them at some point. And three, when you have this anomalous situation, and as a government you're also being quite aggressive rather than tiptoeing on what is increasingly thin ice, then you never know when there would be something which isn't very pretty. Now, Prime Minister Wickremesinghe was seen on all your television channels last week addressing several dozen social media operators, and he said in Sinhalese, he said, the Rajapaksa regime's counter-revolution has commenced, it must be defeated. And I thought, all right, it's an embellishment. After all, Rajapaksa, if at all, wants to come back into parliament, and that's hardly a counter-revolution, but that's all right.
Does he really want to come back to parliament? We haven't seen any statements being made by the former president.
Well, John F. Kennedy used to say, never mind what he says, watch his hands. That goes for everybody. It goes for President Sirisena, it goes for Ranil, it goes for Mahinda Rajapaksa. And when you watch his hands, obviously he's on the stump.
Is it his hand at work?
Well, I have never known Mahinda Rajapaksa to be anyone else's puppet.
When
one thing about
when Mahinda Rajapaksa was president, he always used to have a lead from the front kind of approach.
Yeah.
And he would be at the front lines. He would be at the meetings, at the rallies. He would be going around talking to the people, kissing babies, doing all that kind of stuff.
He's
and
still
making
tickling them. I saw him.
He's still there, but I mean the presence is not that populist leader, that political animal of the past. Because it sort of appears that it's that the strings are actually being pulled by elements that are dependent on him.
Well, Mahinda Rajapaksa was never the kind of guy who would take orders from anybody. I mean, even when he was.
Well, I'm not saying taking orders, but sort of being.
He can't be
being molded.
He can't be a proxy for anyone. I mean, molded by who?
Not a proxy.
Yeah.
But he's being given counsel, and maybe the counsel.
I mean, this is
not
a guy who
very
came into
good.
Parliament in 1970.
Yeah.
There's only one other person of that vintage, and that's Vasudeva. So Mahinda came in 1970.
But don't forget, this is also the first person to be first president to be defeated
because
in an election.
because he ran for third term. He tried to push the envelope.
So maybe now,
and he lost.
and that was all on his own steam. He pushed for the 18th Amendment. That was his hand at work. But now, after the defeat at the January election, it seems that his role is more backseat. And there appears to be a general sense of maybe even reluctance, because he's not very vocal, as it were.
No, actually I see the other way around. I see Mahinda Rajapaksa having been very much his own man throughout his political career. I remember this photograph in the Sunday Leader. I believe it was during the famous Pada Yatra of the early 90s, of him wagging his finger in the face of former, at the time, rising star Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga on the platform. So he was very much his own man, and that was very clearly so during his rise, the funeral of Lakshman Kadirgama 10 years ago, this August, where he made a very courageous, strident, anti-tiger speech. He didn't have the security he would have as president, of course, at that time. When he became president, he went for the LTT when they didn't give him a choice. He refused to back down when the West wanted him to declare a ceasefire. So he's been very much his own man, except in the second term. In the second half of the second term, he was, more than ever, he was trapped in his establishment, which had it was a familial matrix, an extended family matrix, but it also had others. So there was his establishment. And on January 8th, I think he was freed from that. What I see now is far more the Mahinda Rajapaksa that I knew in the 90s and others remember from the 80s. Far more his own man. He's back in touch, he's on the trail, he's with the people, he's attracting more, and he's traveling light. He doesn't have his family with him. He's traveling light. He's far more the populist politician, though he's no longer young, that we knew in the 1970s and 80s and 90s on his way up, than he has been, than he was certainly during that second term where he was just embedded in an establishment. The establishment has been destroyed.
What's to say that he won't bring back the same establishment?
How can he? He's not going to be president, is he?
No,
Again?
I mean as Prime Minister.
That's a presidential, that's the kind of establishment that only a presidency permits. Anywhere in the world, that's why in the United States there have been books which call it the imperial presidency.
Well, you could always come back, dilute the presidential powers, maybe even impeach the president. You never know.
Well, he'd need, that's a very difficult thing to do, he'd need a two-thirds majority. A two-thirds majority. Impeachment is not easy. I've been on the other side of one supporting President Premadasa. That's not easy to do. Why, unless he's, I can't imagine why he would
Can you really underestimate Mahinda Rajapaksa?
No, I think I estimate him right. If he comes back, what he would do is he'd crank up the economy again. I mean, that's what he's good at. He became a developmentalist president, and what people seem to remember right now is the contrast between the stagnation.
The counter-accusation to that is that it wasn't really economic drive, it was actually just crony capitalism with unsolicited proposals, and that's apparently what the current government, the current administration, let's call it, is investigating.
Well, I'm sure there was. I'm sure there was a bit of that, or maybe even quite a bit of that, Nadeem. Though, of course, I don't see any of the charges being commensurate with that kind of propaganda. But crony capitalism apart, there was stuff happening which everybody saw. I mean, there are the roads, the railways.
Seeing and benefiting.
Yeah.
Did that stuff filter down to the masses?
Well, that's a road that anybody could use, right? All those roads.
Well, not just the roads, the buildings, etc. Did all that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, nobody prevents anyone from going to those places, to the arcade, enjoying the fruits of a high growth. I mean, look at the central bank report.
The cricket stadium in
Look at the central bank report. The central bank report shows that growth has dropped during this interim from 7.4 to its 6 point something, and even the business community.
I think it's to be expected, isn't it? When you have a new regime coming in.
On the contrary, I remember J.R. Jayawardena, within months, the first budget, he freed the economy. You had an economic revolution.
See, but J.R. Jayawardena's policy when he came into government was a policy. He was promising economic reform.
Yes.
He wasn't promising constitutional reform so much. So his focus was on economy, whereas the current administration came in on a promise of constitutional and administrative
but that doesn't
reform.
mean that you have to roll back the economy. You remove what's wrong about the previous guy, but you continue with what's right. And you don't have a
Well, you have to address the priorities in a list.
And the priorities in the list are to keep in any list, Nadeem, it cannot be at the expense of economics. And all around us, we see unfinished buildings, machines that don't move, roads half dug, weeds overgrown, and the figures. There's an anti-Rajapaksa website called Economy Next, but it's a good one, it's a smart one. And this morning it says that exports have dropped. They're flatlined. I mean, what's going on? What about the rupee, the strength of the rupee? Now, something is going very wrong at the level of the economy. And the people, I think, are contrasting that with what they recall of the Mahinda Rajapaksa period just, 150 days ago.
But wouldn't it be dangerous to encourage the people to move back towards crony capitalism?
Well, it's a trade-off. I mean, Sir Isaiah Berlin famously said that one of the main lessons of political philosophy is that you can't have all the public goods in one package. I mean, you can't have liberty, equality and fraternity, though the French Revolution thought that was the case.
You can have since you had French, I'll go American, you can have that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and among these rights are equal
life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Yes. But now it's life, liberty, and the pursuit of the Rajapaksas.
No, I mean economically speaking, people should have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Oh,
pursuit of happiness, economically speaking.
Absolutely, and
they're
not going to be happy with the declining growth rate.
With a system of crony capitalism, whether it's a high growth rate or lower growth rate, the people are being denied that right to the pursuit of happiness.
Nadeem, when the people feel that, I mean, there have been layoffs, Why? Because the major projects have stopped.
But isn't that like
25,000 people have been laid off. That's a big deal if you're one of the 25,000 people. And if you talk to the business heads, and I'm sure you do, they're wondering what's going on. Because there's high taxation, which they never expected from the UNP. The UNP can't collect the taxes that they have budgeted for. So there is a crisis of revenue, of liquidity.
But isn't it an inherited crisis of revenue?
Nothing. How is it inherited? When the guy left, it was the economy was dynamic, even according to Arjuna Mahendra's Central Bank report. Everybody know. People look around, and like as I keep talking about my lane, it's half dug. It started before the election. I remember telling my wife, if this election has lost my mind, they're never going to complete this, and it's still there. It's. I don't know who to sue. I didn't start it.
Maybe you should start with the municipal council.
Right. So it's all over the place. There's not a single thing that has gone forward in material terms at the level of the economy. Not one. Unlike, as I said, Jaya Jayawardena, and may I say Ranasinghe Premadasa, who took over in the middle of a civil war. And you know the first thing he did, he hit the ground running. He started with Jana Savia. And where did round one of Jana Savia take place? In Hambantota. The worst hit area in terms of the JVP's second insurrection. I mean, these presidents, as they came in, they did something to turn the country around economically.
Again, we come back to that argument of President Maithripala Sirisena's platform wasn't really one of economic reform, it was structural reform.
Not economic reform, but keep the economy going. I mean, you inherit something that works,
when you're reforming, you keep it working. When you're reforming the structure, it's hard to keep it going the way it is.
Why?
When you're making structural changes.
Frankly, now
I mean, for example, let's take this table. How are you going to hold the table up if you're fixing the legs?
It's very easy.
You need to turn the table upside down.
No, it's very easy, because what did Jaya Jayawardena do? He handed the economy over to his most brilliant mind. A guy with a sort of a left-wing background, by the way, Ronnie DeMel. Why aren't Harsha De Silva or Eran Vikramaratne the Minister of Finance under Ranil Wickremesinghe? Why did he appoint a non-national as the head of the central bank? I mean, I'm not talking in chauvinistic terms. If you want, the central bank manages the macroeconomic finances of the country. You need somebody who has some commitment to the well-being of the country. And somebody who has renounced his citizenship, obviously, by definition, doesn't. Why did the Prime Minister appoint him? Now, the problem of the bond and so on, which Faraz Shaukat Ali on your station has been quite rightly homing in on, that's secondary, that's downstream. Why make this appointment? Is that the way you keep the economy ticking over? Well, I'm sure that Eran or Harsha would have done a better job in running this economy. But they weren't given that portfolio. And I'm wondering why.
Dr. Harsha De Silva is effectively the Deputy Prime Minister.
There's no effective. He's effective on television. He's not making macroeconomic policy. The Finance Minister makes it very clear.
Okay. We move away from the economics and on to another topic that I want to cover, which is the much-awaited Constitutional Council. If we're going in for an election, would it mean that a Constitutional Council that is composed now would only be in effect until Parliament is dissolved?
Well, I don't know how this is going to work, because I recall when I asked my friend Professor Rajiv Vijay why on earth he voted for the 18th Amendment, and he said, Dan, you weren't around. The 17th Amendment didn't work. These parties didn't nominate people. It just didn't work. It was dysfunctional. Now, I didn't quite buy it, but I can now understand what he's saying.
So the response to that was to vote for the 18th Amendment.
Yeah, the 18th Amendment has two parts. One was the removal of term limits, the two-term limit on the presidency, which I would say was the negative part, though there are several other countries in the world which have done the same thing, but let's leave that aside. The other part was the abolition, really, of the 17th Amendment, the independent commissions. Right? Now, that wasn't the right way to go, to abolish it. But what should have been done was not done even in the 19th Amendment. And now we are seeing problems. What should have been done? We should have restored, as I must say Rajiv reminded the Parliament, we should have restored the Independent Public Services Commission, that we had up until 1972, when you had permanent secretaries, whoever the minister was, whichever party was in power. It didn't matter, because your senior civil servant who had come in through stringent examinations and been promoted on the basis of seniority would remain. That's the permanent civil service. We didn't restore the permanent civil service. JR didn't do it in 78. It was abolished by Mrs. Bandaranaike in 72. JR did not restore it, and nor did the 19th Amendment. Instead, you have this contraption where you have a constitutional council which is nominated. The constitutional council picks the so-called independent commissions. The independent commissions then appoint da-da-da-da-da. It looks like this incredible flying machine. I mean, you know. And now you have a problem.
What's the problem?
Well, the problem is that there are those in the opposition who raise the question as to the conflict of interest that seems to arise when a minister has been nominated to the Constitutional Council, and the minister then nominates people for the independent commissions which will oversee some of the functions of the ministry, such as tenders, for instance, for, I don't know, energy, for instance. So this hasn't been thought through. That's one problem. And then, of course, there are others. Therefore, you have some element of friction which should not have been the case from the get-go. Now, I suspect that had this been an elected government and everything had found its place and its level and everyone knew what their relative strengths were and they weren't posturing and jockeying for an election that is yet to come, you might not have had this problem. Things would have settled. But you're trying to do this, the government is trying to do this Constitutional Council thing, then the 20th Amendment thing, in a situation which is transitional. And therefore it can't bear the traffic. Every initiative leads to needless disputation and polarization. And every bill, every issue becomes a battleground, it becomes an instrument in a partisan struggle, which will settle the moment you have an election.
So an election is the most important...
Well, I would say it's the principle, Nadeem. The principle is you cannot continue to have a government that is unelected and does not have the majority of the House. It's past its sell-by date. Its sell-by date was 100 days. Now, you've either got to have an election or you've got to put the boot on the other foot, and that is you've given the UNP, the unelected UNP, a minority government, 100 and something days. You've got to give the SLFP a similar chance. After all, the 20th Amendment comes from that side of the House, just as the 19th Amendment came from this side of the House. So what you can't do is maintain the status quo, which is what's happening. This status quo, which is increasingly illegitimate, is being dragged out rather like as schoolboys we used to do something which we used to be admonished for, munch the chewing gum and then draw it out and stick the thing on the desk. That's what this government is looking like. It's stretched on for far too long.
So you think the Parliament should wait for 20th Amendment or dissolve before? Do you think the President should wait for the 20th Amendment?
Well, I mean, he should either hand it over to the party that commands the majority of the House, which is the SLFP, and then have the 20th Amendment under the SLFP. I mean, you had the 19th Amendment under the UNP with SLFP support. Why not the 20th Amendment under the SLFP with UNP support? I mean, fair is fair, right? Either do that or just dissolve and, you know, toss them all in at the deep end and let them swim.
See where the chips fall.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Dr. Jadhika, I'd like to talk now a little bit about the minor parties and the minority parties, where they stand with this 20th Amendment. The JHU seems oddly, in spite of being a minor party, seems oddly supportive of the 20th Amendment in its current form. while the JVP, SLMC and TNA appear to disagree with some components of the draft that has been presented to them. Of course, the draft is not in the public domain, so we haven't seen it yet. How do you think this will pan out? How much of an impact will the minor parties have on the fate of the 20th Amendment?
Well, I think the minor parties will have a major impact for a very simple reason. But before that, let me deal with the JHU. According to the pro-UNP social media, and even according to a piece in the state-run Daily News a couple of weeks ago, the JHU, which has just 2 seats, I believe, does not really regard itself as a minor party. Now, that might come as a surprise to you. But according to these sources, the JHU hopes to embed itself in what is left of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party after the split or the schism with Mahinda Rajapaksa has taken place. So, step 1 is deny Mahinda Rajapaksa of SLFP nomination, push the party to a split, embed yourself in what remains of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, come into Parliament, and then you can take over part of the SLFP at least. So, the JHU and Mr. Champika Ranaweka's perspective is supposed to be that, according to the UNP websites or the pro-UNP websites, which have been quite rude about him, and also according to at least one political piece in the state-run Ceylon Daily News. Now, that would explain why the JHU doesn't view the 20th Amendment in the same way. The JHU sees itself as part of the presidential faction or the Sirisena faction, which is a kind of a floating populace consisting of some members of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, former President Chandrika Bananaike Kumaratunga, who probably considers herself not as a member of the Sirisena faction, but President Sirisena as a member of the CBK faction. And then Field Marshal Fonseca is a kind of a on-again, off-again member. And you have the JHU, which fancies itself as a sort of a strategically thinking chip on this board. Now, the other parties have a problem with the 20th Amendment, which is a little disconcerting because the 20th Amendment issues from the Dinesh Gunawardena Committee report, which has been around for many years. There was very careful deliberation, consultation, and therefore it should have been easier to arrive at a consensus, but that is not the case. Now, the minor parties will have a major impact, as I said, because the United National Party, though it is very much a major party, is looking at the morning after the election. Now, this time around, the Swan, the Hansaya, will not really run in the old way. It would have the elephant, the UNP contesting, and they would face the SLFP, either a divided SLFP or in any case the anti-UNP forces. The UNP hopes to emerge the victor, the largest single party, but the fallback seems to be that even if Mahinda Rajapaksa fails to be destroyed, as Prime Minister Wickremesinghe urged that he be, politically of course, that the President will call upon the UNP to form the government because it will be able to form a coalition with the TNA and the SLMC and perhaps even the JVP. Now, that's a little dicey, but still. So, what we're talking about is a morning after the election scenario.
But in the current context,
of a recomposed Swan.
In the current context, though, isn't the swan, the elephant, the hand, the beetle leaf? It seems that for the first time in some time, the United National Party is actually united.
Yes, it is.
And that the elephant is the biggest elephant in the room. So should the UNP really be worried that much about the morning after?
I think it is. Because it's not dumb. It thinks that it can win because the SLFP looks increasingly divided. But there is some concern, because if there weren't any concern, Prime Minister Wickremesinghe shouldn't bother to urge that Rajapaksa should be destroyed politically. I mean, it's a little excessive, isn't it? So why would that be? That would be because the potential strength of a Rajapaksa formation in the parliament could be, if I may change the metaphor, a huge fly in whatever ointment that the UNP has in mind. Now, therefore, the UNP is probably thinking of Plan B. Plan B is, what if it needs, and it's almost like certain to need to form a coalition with the minority parties. And the President, they hope, can be counted upon to call on them rather than on a Rajapaksa populist formation, should such a formation do well at the parliamentary election. Okay, therefore, the UNP has to think not simply as a major party, but a major party that would require the support of the minor and minority parties to form a government in the event of Mahinda Rajapaksa doing well at the parliamentary election. Which means that they have to take very seriously the objections of those minor/minority parties about the 20th Amendment, which seems to be why the UNP is a little slippery in its commitment to the 20th Amendment.
So, Dr. Jayatilaka, let's take a look back at the 100-day government. It's past, it's present, and it's very short future, let's hope. 100-day government came in. One of the first things they did was the interim budget, the economic, the concessions, all handouts, welfare, let's call it, the taxation. Then soon after that, work started on the
did you say work?
Work started on the 19th Amendment, and well, political structural reforms.
Yes.
Structural reformation of the constitution of the country.
Indeed.
And went on, watered down, passed. There are still certain things in the 100-day program that haven't happened, though. And while it appears that the powers that be, the politicians, and this includes all the factions, all the so-called spheres of influence in Sri Lankan politics at the moment, are very glad that no one's asking what's happening to these other factors in the 100-day program. I'm talking, of course, about the amending of Parliament standing orders, the Code of Conduct for Public Representatives, the Right to Information Bill. Do you think if this is not done in this 100-day government, that we can expect it from any government that will be elected in an upcoming general election?
Well, Nadeem, it would depend on who wins, the kind of coalition that's formed, whether these issues will be up front during the parliamentary election, or whether other issues and considerations will supersede them. Now, you have the 100-day program, and the 100 days are over, the program is incomplete. Now, you can't keep saying, well, let's continue this because we've got stuff that we haven't done. You can if you are an elected government. If your cabinet has been elected, then you have a mandate, you have legitimacy.
If President Sirisena decides that this national government has sort of had its run, and that it's time to give the SLFP a go, so SLFP led with UNP support, can we expect these reforms to actually be brought in?
Well, I believe so, because the SLFP wouldn't want to go before the electorate empty-handed. They'd compete with the UNP. They'd want to do something. But
post-election, with assuming, hypothetically, if former President Mahinda Rajapaksa is given a nomination, if the SLFP turns out to be stronger than
You
people
mean,
expect.
yeah, SLP with Mahinda.
Yeah, and that if by some chance President Mahinda Rajapaksa returns as Prime Minister, can we expect these reforms? These are vitally important things for the country. It in terms of determining the quality of our public representation. Can we expect this from President Mahinda Rajapaksa?
Well, I think that Mahinda Rajapaksa can become Prime Minister even if he isn't given SLP nomination, but whichever way, whether it's as the SLP or as a new formation, if he does become PM, I think much will depend on his perception of the situation. For instance, when he comes in, if he feels that there's been quite a bit of damage done to economic development, he would try to kickstart that. It all depends on where you're coming from. My hunch is that his main concern, if you listen to what he says at these meetings, it's all about stagnation. It's about unfinished development projects and so on. So I think he would try to kickstart what he thinks is a stagnant economy. I don't expect him to necessarily complete what the Swan manifesto said in its 100-day manifesto. I mean,
yeah, but these are,
it
doesn't necessarily have to be from the Swan manifesto, because technically some of these things are incorporated from his own Chintana, such as the right to information, which started out as a right to information bill and then a commitment to right to information. So can we expect, these are, how do you say it? Information is the oxygen of democracy. The free flow of information enables the citizenry to make informed choices about the future of the state, of the country. Can we expect that sort of commitment to democracy from from our current pool of public representatives, UPFA or UNP?
Well, I think,
or JVP.
I mean, I think there'll be commitment to democracy, but I don't think it will have the same emphasis on what I would call superstructural reforms. The UNP comes from a different tradition. It is what one would call a conservative liberal or liberal conservative tradition, which places greater emphasis on individual rights and freedoms and political freedom. The SLFP and those parties to the left come from a different tradition, which is far more social democratic or left of center. It's center right, center left. And whatever the brand name, whatever the party that Mahinda Rajapaksa chooses to contest from, is still going to be center left, and the UNP is still going to be center right. So I don't see a center left populist or social democratic party movement, United Front, coming in and according the same priorities to the set of issues that the center-right UNP would. Now, there's something new here.
So, are you saying that we can expect more in terms of individual freedoms, right to information, etc., from the UNP than the SLFP?
Not necessarily. I mean, generically, I would have thought so. But if you take Prime Minister Wickremesinghe himself, one can only go by the track record. And the track record is one in which the United National Party, under his leadership, has had a complete makeover, a very autocratic constitution, party constitution, which was not the case when he took over the party. I remember Mr. Sirisena Kure, former General Secretary of the party, up on one of your roofer interviews, explaining that the UNP had the most democratic party constitution, in which there was a broad-based body, but Ranil came in and hyper-centralized the party constitution. So I think UNPers are far less free within the party than they used to be in the pre-Ranil Wickremesinghe period. Therefore, I don't think you can really count on greater individual democratic freedom under Prime Minister, under Wickremesinghe Prime Ministership. But there are certain things that you can count on, and I'm going on the basis of what Prime Minister Wickremesinghe himself has said and done. If you take the Arjuna Mahendran issue, you will find a greater diasporification of the economy. If you take what Mangala Samarveera has said and what Jampati Vikramatne has said, you will have a new constitution in which power is removed almost completely from the president and transferred to the Prime Minister, and the unitary status removed or diluted, not mentioned at all. Far greater, let us say, a federal or quasi-federal system. You would also have cooperation with the international inquiry into so-called war crimes, and a domestic inquiry with international components, international teams, which is hardly a domestic inquiry. You would have a reorientation of Sri Lanka's foreign policy, which Prime Minister Wickremesinghe wrote about in the Japan Times, where he talked about a reset in the strategic orientation of Sri Lanka, which means a shift away from Asia, especially China, towards the West, with its diaspora voters, I might add, and its human rights emphasis, which meant that even under President Jayawardena we weren't sold any warplanes during the war, but there would be a reorientation. So with Prime Minister Wickremesinghe, there would be certain things that you can expect, going by his own track record and his pronouncements. And with Mahinda Rajapaksa, I mean, these are not two unknown quantities, these are very well known.
So I think on that topic, this is something that has been sort of bugging me for some time. Sri Lanka is one of those countries where we see that whenever a new political party comes into power, there seems to be reorientation. I mean, it happens in any country when new parties come into government, but reorientation on a scale in terms of foreign policy, economic policy, on an almost unprecedented scale when you compare it to more, let's say, developed countries.
Definitely.
Is our country lacking a system of core values, a core system of values that guides or sort of gives a sense of purpose, that guides our course of the modern nation state of Sri Lanka in comparison to other countries?
Well, that's one of the things we lack. There is no consensus on values, but there's something that's far more fundamental that we lack, and we've lacked for quite a while. Since you did mention foreign policy, we lack the institutional capacity and the habit of thinking, of deep analytical thinking. Now, on foreign policy, the discussion should be on the identification of Sri Lanka's vital national interests. Now, of course, we would have different views on what those national interests are. But let there be a discussion on this.
Even when we talk about our vital national interests, it seems that we're more geared towards thinking towards who's going to do us more favors.
No, I don't think so. Because we have different notions of who us means. Because if you look at it one way, China is rising economically. The West is in economic decline. They don't give money for certain kinds of projects anyway, which is why you have the Chinese-initiated Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which the US tried to prevent people from joining, but even Britain rushed to join. So you've got the rise of China economically, and you don't have, frankly, a Tamil diaspora, and you don't have a Tamil Nadu in China. So it makes a lot of sense to have a close relationship because they are more reliable allies. But that's from one perspective. From another perspective, such as Mr. Wickremesinghe's, you see all the reference points are the revolution in 1991 where there was a collapse of the Soviet Union. These are the Yahapal and this is the Yahapalan discourse. Then there's the Arab Spring. These are what Mangala Samarveera has been talking about. So the identification there is with the post-Cold War Russia for a while, basically Yeltsin Russia, not Putin's Russia, Eastern Europe, the ones which have joined NATO, the Arab Spring, which has gone very bloody indeed. So that is one, and of course the International Democratic Union, which Prime Minister Wickremesinghe affiliated the UNP with. and that's the coalition, the global coalition of right of center parties and actually right-wing parties, co-chaired by the US Republicans and the British Conservatives. Now, no UNP leader during the whole of the Cold War, where they could have got a lot of money if they officially allied with the West, no UNP leader from DS to Premadasa allied the party with the ideological right in the world. But Ranil did. So that's one...
Sir John Kothalawa.
Not officially. I mean, he was, in terms of foreign policy, he was the precursor of the present Ranil Mangala administration. But that was at the level of the government. The UNP was never affiliated. But Ranil affiliated the UNP with this global coalition of the international right. So we know what to expect. It's clear. With Mahinda Rajapaksa, again, it's fairly clear, because if I had to sum up, I would say it's a kind of an East Asian model with all the strengths and weaknesses of the East Asian model. That's what I see. It's more East Asian than, certainly not Latin American. I would have liked it if it were more sort of Latin American social democrat, but that's my temperament. It's far more East Asian. So these are the choices. Unfortunately, these choices are not based on deep-going public debate, discussion. It's not discussed in Parliament. There's never been a white paper on foreign policy in Parliament. There's no serious
is it because when the modern nation state of Sri Lanka, the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka, was formed, is it because there was no foundation of core values that sort of guided the country, as in, this is what the country stands for, and therefore this is what we will pursue, and this is the sort of rough chart of our course? Are we lacking, for example, like France, liberty, equality and fraternity, are we lacking that kind of gel that holds the citizenry to a common purpose?
Well, there is some gel, obviously, Nadeem, because we couldn't have registered...
What is our gel? What is Sri Lanka's gel? If it's not liberty, equality and brotherhood,
well,
what is our
let's
gel?
look at the strengths. We did survive a 30-year war, which would have shattered most states. We also had an episode of external intrusion. We maintained the rudiments of practicing democracy, which is why you've never had a military dictatorship in this country. We've staved off totalitarian left-wing insurrections. So, and we've maintained pretty good social indicators. Our social progress indicators are the best in South Asia. And the economy has been growing at a very respectable rate. So, something has been working, Nadeem. And the gel that's kept that working probably is a sense of our identity as an island. There's a kind of a destiny that islands have, that you're somehow special. Whether that's a good thing or bad thing, I don't know. But you're not part of the teeming landmass. And therefore there's a sense of a distinctive destiny, if you like, and a sense of independence, a sense of being different. Now, is that cultural? That's
what sort of questions me. What crops up in my mind is, it's a sense. It's only a sense among the people.
Very good point.
And that there's nothing in hard documented writing, some sort of declaration.
Very good point.
That brings the island, that brings all these diverse communities to a common identity, as in this is our core.
What we're talking about, Nadeem, is the difference between a sense and an idea. And that's what Charles de Gaulle gave France, what he called a certain idea of France. That's what Nehru gave India.
That's what Nehru gave India.
An idea of India. Now, we have failed in that.
So what is the idea of Sri Lanka?
Well, I have an idea of Sri Lanka, but that's my idea of Sri Lanka. I have what I call the Ravana view of Sri Lanka. Because Ravana was, if he existed, and well, it doesn't really matter.
Archaeological evidence just point to the possibility of his existence.
Ramayana, I mean, as far as Southeast Asia is concerned, in South Asia, he existed. Now, Rama was before the Sinhalese and the Tamils and the Muslims and everybody else. Ravana was about the island, the place. Ravana is identified with Lanka, not with the Sinhalese, not with the Tamils. Lanka, which also distinguished itself from the landmass of India, hence Ravana. So Ravana and Lanka, my idea is the sense of place. The loyalty must be to, not the only loyalty, may not even be the highest loyalty, but to the island, the Ravana view of safeguarding the island and its independence and its independent destiny. That's my take on it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jayatilaka. Some deeply philosophical stuff to finish off with. We hope it's given some material for our viewers also to ponder on. Thank you very much for coming on the program again. Thank you also to our viewers. I'll leave you with this question. Is Sri Lanka lacking an idea? Do you feel that we are lacking an idea of what Sri Lanka is and what Sri Lanka stands for? Good night and good luck.